And when I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
And if we're talking tight ends and we're going into round 2, maybe round 3, give me Ian Thomas, please. Let's just do the damn thing.
Just based on giving his overall ability. Again, I like his arm. I think he can make every throw.
The pick at number 12 is in.
Oh, yes, we're back. Cover 1, the NFL Draft Podcast. We are back. I'm Russell Brown. With me, CP Christian Page. My man, how we doing?
Man, I'm doing good. Now that we're hopping back on the podcast, this is kind of in the realm of getting back to normal life. So we're getting some stores open. We were just talking about food and going to restaurants right before we hit record. So now we got the podcast back going on. So we're feeling a little bit normal life when we're recording this podcast today.
Yeah, man, it's been a minute, definitely since we did a show. I think we did one last month at the beginning of May, so it's been a couple of weeks. But, we took the month of May, just kind of refresh, relax, get our feet underneath us, get back to our personal lives, I guess, a little bit. But now we're ready for more sports and doing those types of things and really getting back into the 2021 NFL draft process, which we have slowly kind of dipped our feet into the pool, if you will, dipped our toes into the pool to check the temperature. And I don't think we have really any crazy hot takes just yet. And we don't really live to bring you that. We more so just kind of go through the process of who we're watching and what we're doing and what's in the weeks ahead. And that's what we're doing right now today on this show. You guys, of course, can get caught up with every podcast episode that we've ever done by going to Apple Podcast or to Spreaker.com, and you will find Cover 1 NFL Draft podcast on there, or on Spotify as well. It's everywhere. YouTube, all places, all platforms that you get your podcast. So be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. I hope I don't sound too echoey. I'm actually doing this in my kitchen, which I never do. And I always feel like when I'm in a kitchen, it like echoes or booms. So if I at all like have a weird pause, that's probably why. But let's jump into some players that we've been watching. I've got kind of a list of names. I know you have quite a few names as well. So let's just kind of go back and forth off of some players that we've been watching, what to look out for when you're watching these guys. Because, again, it's still very early. It's June 10th. We all kind of know that we should not have anything set in stone just yet, except for maybe one guy. And I'll start there. Penei Sewell from Oregon. If I said that right, great. If not, you guys know me. But the left tackle for Oregon, this kid is an absolute – just a tank. I don't know how else to put it. This guy is the most complete offensive tackle maybe I've seen ever. I don't know, maybe at least for an offensive lineman's sake since Quentin Nelson, for sure. And he is just the way he moves in space, the way he keeps his head on a swivel, and just really how technically sound he is. It is very special. Oregon's got a great thing going. And if you're looking for a player that's not a quarterback to study first, Sewell's your guy for sure, 100%. I know you talked briefly about him. What's your spin on him, and what should we expect from him really this coming season if we have one?
Yeah, he's just a dominant player, and he can perform at every level of the field. And I say that because he has incredible acceleration at the second level, and seeing some of those zone-type runs that Oregon likes to execute, that he is a focal point of seeing, him. Let's just take that one step back. He doesn't miss a beat and immediately goes to the second level, gets that seal block. And Oregon has a lot of speed on an offense. Talked about Johnny Johnson, receiver, C.J. Verdell at running back. I think he's going to have a really outstanding year. But Sewell just attacking the second level, that's the first thing that pops in my head. But obviously his hand placement and his overall pad level and just leverage overall, you really have to be nitpicky and maybe even further than that to find something in his game that you don't think could translate to the next level. Because the guy is – I don't say he's a complete prospect because I still, oddly enough, he could probably get maybe just a little bit stronger, and you could see some improvements maybe with dealing with some of those bull rushes and those power rushes. But overall, this guy, I mean, he's probably the best player in this class, maybe alongside Trevor Lawrence, the quarterback out of Clemson. But you really have to be nitpicky to find something wrong with his game.
And there's certainly a shot that we see him go first overall if a team does not need a quarterback at first overall. I mean, we obviously don't know. We'll have to see how it plays out. But let's just say hypothetical. I mean, if a team like, I don't know, let's say the Cincinnati Bengals, if they flunk out again and they, something happens to Joe Burrow or whatever, or maybe even Miami. I mean, Miami would be a home run for a landing spot for Sewell. So it'd be great. I think for a guy that won the Outland Trophy last year, which is for the best interior lineman in football, defensive lineman or offensive lineman can win it. And, he joins a list of guys like Orlando Pace, Joe Thomas, Aaron Donald. To join that list, it means you're an elite player, and that's exactly what he is. So I wrote about him this past week. If you guys want to check that out, you go over to cover1.net. It's my first article written piece in a month, so bear with me there. But a lot of good film in there, a lot of good content in that piece. So be sure to check that out. You can obviously get that the Cover One app for free, so you can download that for free in your app store by searching Cover One app. Who's a guy that you've been watching?
Yeah, let's just stick with the offensive line room here. And a guy that we're talking, Sewell being one of the cream of the crop type of players, regardless of position. A guy that, when all these 2021 watch lists started unfolding, was a guy that I was kind of surprised not to see really at that top tier of players that were listed. And that's Wyatt Davis, the right guard out of Ohio State. The guy is a stud. He will hit you in the mouth. He's a solid finisher, really good hand placement, operates at that second level, pulls very well, shows a lot of fluidity in his lower body and really good footwork in both pass sets and in the run game. So he's the guy that has definitely stood out to me just from day one. He flirted a little bit with the NFL last year, but there was a quote saying regardless of what he got back from the advisory council, he was still going to commit to playing Ohio State for at least one more year. So I think once, you're seeing Justin Fields and you're seeing, Trey Sermon, now the Oklahoma transfer, now a running back for Ohio State, and Master Teague, the running back that's been there for a couple years now. Once you kind of key in on them, make sure you're paying attention to number 52 on that right side in the interior, because the guy is a baller and he definitely makes a lot of impact plays in a very dynamic offense.
He is certainly a player that I think when we talk about the offensive line group, I mean, we probably talked about the top offensive tackle. We're probably talking about the top interior offensive lineman as a whole. When I was watching Jonah Jackson for a Detroit Lions piece that I did after the draft and how he fit with the Lions, Wyatt Davis just completely blew me away every single time I was watching him. And I'm like, oh my, like this guy, I cannot wait to watch this guy in depth next year, meaning this year. So he's going to be a lot of fun. I like him a lot. And I know he's been one of your guys through the whole process. I'm going to go with two guys here, and I'll stay in the trenches just for a moment. And that's James Empey, out of BYU. This is an interior offensive lineman that was actually highly graded from Pro Football Focus. And I kind of was caught off guard by it because I didn't really think BYU had a ton of talent there, but they actually do. I'll talk about one now, and I'll talk about another BYU player later. But James Empey, their center from BYU, 86.5 was his passing grade from Pro Football Focus. I really like this kid. I like his snap to step quickness. I like the way he engages on his blocks, the lateral movements that he has. He anchors actually sometimes late in the process, which will burn him at the next level, but he does have a decent anchor. And I think if you're looking at interior offensive line, and obviously start at the top with Wyatt Davis, but as you go down the list, get to James Empey out of BYU. He'll be a senior this year. His dad actually played at BYU. He was he played in the late 80s, early 90s. He was a team captain his senior year. So keep an eye on him. He's familiar with the program. He's comfortable in that program. He could be a Senior Bowl guy as well. So it'll be fun to see there. But another guy that is your guy, and that's Marvin Wilson out of Florida State. I mean, this was your guy last year. If he would have came out, I think we probably would have still seen him despite the injury. We would have seen him as a first-round pick, and he would have definitely been in that Derek Brown discussion as far as one of the top defensive tackles, as well as Javon Kinlaw. And at 6'5", 310, I only go back to him because I was watching the Clemson game against Florida State, and he was just all over the field. He was batting down passes, and He was running down Travis Etienne left and right. I just love the motor from him. I think this is a guy that, again, when we talk about players that aren't quarterbacks, if we go to the defensive side of the ball, you'll probably talk about Micah Parsons out of Penn State, and then you'll go to Marvin Wilson out of Florida State. So I know that's your guy. I'm sure you've got a little bit on Marvin Wilson.
Oh, yeah, of course. But Wilson's one of those guys where his goal is to make the offense uncomfortable. And that's lining up at the 0 tech, sometimes lining up even at the 5 tech and kind of doing somewhat of a stunt with the interior guy and him busting through the middle of the line. But the guy, he has an A-plus motor, and you can tell he's a very coachable human being. Obviously, he was in the news the past couple of weeks, but I think that shows a little bit more of that leadership role that he's taken over. He's like, hey, Coach Norvell, like, these are my dudes first. We still have to kind of, get on the right page to go forward. But sounds like they've worked out that situation as far as that goes. But with Wilson, I mean, he's going to have an outstanding season. I mean, barring injury, and let's hope everything checks out. I believe, was it a hand injury? I believe that's what kept him out the rest of the year last year. But very versatile, like I said, a lot of athleticism, and shows a lot of pass rushing ability inside, a lot of upper body movements, rip-through moves, swim moves, and he doesn't really miss a beat when he does that. I think his pad level varies every now and then. But again, like I said, I want a defensive lineman or anybody on defense that is his goal is to make the guy in front of him uncomfortable, and he does that with a multitude of ways. So Marvin Wilson's definitely one of my favorite guys. I have an article on him from last year. We did our summer scouting series. Obviously, he comes back. That's why we're talking about him today. And another guy that I wrote about last year, this might be the last offensive lineman we talk about. Who knows? Probably not, because we are who we are. But Samuel Cosmi, the left tackle out of Texas, kind of burst onto the scene last year, especially in that LSU game in week 2. I thought he held his own against Calebon Chason. Chason, we know, and maybe at that point he wasn't as fine-tuned as he was when he finished the season and when he was being evaluated as that top 15 draft selection. But Cosmi held his own against the quicker Chason, really supplemented well with the upper body. And I thought he displayed a lot of really good footwork and showed strength. And Cosmi was a guy that his senior year of high school, he was around 260 pounds. So he hit the weight room pretty quickly at Texas, came onto the field, I believe, as a sophomore, and then executed that way. And I think Texas, again, talking about Wyatt Davis with Justin Fields at Ohio State, there's going to be a lot of eyes on Texas quarterback Sam Ehlinger and their dynamic offense, so to speak. So once you kind of key in your eyes on Ehlinger, definitely pay attention to the left side of the line, because Cosmi has a lot of physical intrigue. I still think he's kind of connecting the dots, just maybe based on awareness and overall ability, but he has those physical traits that you definitely want to see in the starting left tackle.
Certainly one of your guys. I think he's a player that, when you kind of get into that, I don't know, low end first tier of the left tackle group, or the beginning of a second tier of an offensive tackle group, he's certainly going to be in the mix, and he's got tons of experience. I mean, 27 career games, 26 starts. I like his skill set quite a bit. I'm with you. I think there's also times I think he could, just get at times maybe stronger at the point of attack, work on his balance a little bit at times. But overall, I like his skill set for a guy that, was a redshirt freshman in 2018, a redshirt sophomore last year, be a redshirt junior this year. But he was a key part, to Ehlinger and just that offense. And at 6'7", 310, that's what he's listed at. So he's probably realistically like 6'5", 312, but you can work with that all day. So I like his skill set. I think he could have a huge year. But again, I think with Texas, last year there was a couple of guys that we thought were going to have like a really big year, and they didn't. So I hope he doesn't fall into that, falls kind of behind or falls backwards and doesn't take the steps needed and doesn't grow into the player that, we're thinking he's going to be. But I'm with you. I think he's still very talented, and I think he can become what we think he'll be. But that's all I've got as far as offensive linemen for myself. I've got 2 tight ends, and that's Kyle Pitts out of Florida. Absolutely love this kid. Watched him this past week, and I think this is a guy that when you just talk about the length of a tight end, teams are going to fall in love with kind of those vertical threats at 6'6", 239. And the way he moves, the way he utilizes his length, and how he attacks at the catch point, I think is key. He had 54 receptions last year for almost 700 yards, and I think he'll see an increase actually with no Van Jefferson there and, no LaMichael Pirine and the way that offense is shaped out to be. I think he's got obviously a defined role in that offense, but I think he could see an increase in production and in targets. And if that's the case, I think he could be potentially the best tight end next year when we get into the draft process even more. But he uses his long arms well to create some separation, and I think that's going to help him. So he's versatile. He can be an X receiver. He can play in the slot, be an inline guy. Got to get better as a blocker. But again, 6'6", 239, teams are going to fall in love with him. And when you look at the way some teams, especially in my opinion, in the NFC South, how they value tight ends, if Greg Olson's not going back to Carolina, if Ian Thomas doesn't take the right step in the right direction, I think Pitts would be a great fit there. I think he'd be a great fit in Atlanta if Hayden Hurst can't do his thing. And, with New Orleans, you never know. I think they value tight ends in a lot of different ways, and I think Pitts would be a great fit there. So, I mean, I'm already looking at team fits for him just because I think he's that good. And then another guy, just off the radar a little bit, Matt Bushman out of BYU. I said I had another BYU guy and real fast on him. I think 47 receptions last year, almost 700 yards. He had 4 touchdowns. I think this is a guy that's just got good length. I think he understands, he's not as athletic as a guy like Kyle Pitts. He's not even as long as far as an arm length as a guy like Kyle Pitts. It doesn't look like it, but he is a player that he's thick build. He, runs through arm tackles. He just looks the part for the tight end position. And he kind of reminds me of like an Austin Hooper in a sense. And I think, maybe that's a little rich, but Austin Hooper was, again, like a 3rd, 4th round pick coming out. I think Bushman could be one of those guys that falls under the radar and is actually much better as a pro than maybe his last 2 years at BYU. I don't know. It's still a very good season last year, don't get me wrong, but I like Bushman. So keep tabs on both those tight ends.
Yeah, who would have thought that both of us at this time would already have something on a BYU tight end? But it looks like we do, because I'm glad you mentioned him when you were talking about the center over there in BYU. I was like, oh, I know who you're going to talk about next when you're foreshadowing there. But Bushman, yeah, I think just talking about tight ends in this class, which, there's a decent handful. I think it's a little stronger than last year's class just looking at these preliminary guys. But Bushman, his hands are outstanding. I mean, you're not going to see him barely drop any passes. According to Sports Info Solution, only 2 drops in the span of 3 years, and that's roughly, that's over 100 receptions and over 150 targets. So he definitely has the reliable hands there. But he is a guy, I like the Austin Hooper comparison, because he's not this guy that's going to necessarily threaten the middle parts of the field or threaten the seam based on his athleticism, but he always finds a way that he's open by a good bit. And so he can win in those contested areas as well. But I like that you mentioned him, because he is kind of that top 75 to top 100 type selection we're evaluating at this point with that projection. But he has a lot of intrigue. His upside as a starter. Again, long time to go, but based on the 3 seasons we've saw and just the consistency and the reliability, he's definitely got a circle when you're looking at college football this year.
Mm-hmm. You got anybody else? I know you said you had a quarterback.
Yeah, so Jamie Newman, the Wake Forest, now Georgia graduate transfer quarterback, saw a lot of possibly top 3, top 4 coming into the season. Again, everybody has their own opinion. I'm not going to knock it. We still have a whole nother season to evaluate these guys. But Jamie Newman, I saw some of them, of course, last year at Wake Forest, which he was kind of teetering with coming out to the draft. But obviously he's chose to stick, and now is a grad transfer at Georgia. And we'll assume the starting role there left after Jake Fromm. But Newman, when I went back and watched him, Wake Forest offense is very strange. They do a lot of RPO things, and they do not execute them like Tanner Morgan at Minnesota does. He executes that offense to maybe the highest marks it could be. Newman, I'm not blaming him, but there was a lot of very interesting little triple option looks, RPO looks that I don't think necessarily he had all the power to audible out of. So that's one. I'm not going to hold that against him. But in some of those RPO situations, I noticed just looking at his maybe awareness and his ability to read defenses, a lot of times when he pulled the ball and drop back to pass, he missed a lot of open receivers over the middle of the field. And it was one where he trusts his arm strength, because he has some arm strength to really make very tight window contested catches or throws, and he shows a lot of that ability over the middle of the field in either deep parts of the field. But I did notice a lot of accuracy issues in that 10 to 15 range. Maybe he just felt a little rushed, but it's still, when you're playing now and against the Florida defense, against the Alabama defense that Georgia will face this year in the regular season, you got to be able to make those throws. And a lot of those came on, third and shorts, and just crucial plays also in the red zone. But I think if Newman can maybe clean up and maybe just get a little more comfortable, his mechanics, sometimes he throws a little bit off his back foot, doesn't continue his drops, and you can see some of the accuracy falter, at least in the further parts of the field. But I think Newman, I think with the right coaching, I think the Georgia offensive scheme, depending on if it is set up as they had in the past, I think it may be better his game a little bit. He's not this dynamic runner that a lot of people want to pigeonhole him to. He's more of a clean pocket passer, but can make plays on his feet. But I think, translating over to this Georgia offense, I think will make him a little more comfortable, and we may see some things come out of his game that we didn't see at Wake Forest. But one more guy real quick. His receiver at Wake Forest, Sage Surat, big-time wide receiver, 6'3", 215 pounds. He makes all kind of plays. When you watch Newman, you're seeing Surat make all kind of contested catches, jump ball plays in the end zone, doing a lot of things after the catch. I think Surat has a lot of upside to be in that top 40, top 50 conversation. And this wide receiver class, I can't believe I'm saying it, but it rivals everything from last year's class so far, because if you just say name the top wide receivers in college football this year, you're going to name about 12 to 15 by accident. It doesn't even include digging a little deeper down into your studies so far. So these past two wide receiver classes are incredible. But Surat kind of functions more of that big-bodied guy, can play in the slot, kind of be that move piece if you want to put him maybe in line and tied in with some plays in the red zone. I definitely like the upside of Surat. But it's Wake Forest, man. There's some sleepers on that team last year. But obviously Newman now at Georgia. Surat's still there, but you have to expect some of his production probably to drop some.
I'm glad you mentioned Newman, because he's a guy that I think he's so talented, but he limits himself with some of just the mechanical flaws that he has. And like you were kind of going through there. And it's weird that you mentioned Tanner Morgan, because that's a quarterback I have listed. And I was like, is he I looked over my shoulder. I thought maybe you were at my house. But, Newman going to Georgia, it's an interesting transfer, and I'm intrigued by it. And I want to get your spin on it. Is Georgia going to go, because now they didn't just get Jamie Newman. They also just got JT Daniels out of USC. And I had somebody in my mentions saying, JT Daniels is going to be the starting quarterback. In my personal opinion, why would they roll with Daniels when they could have Newman for this year, get Daniels in the offense, get him comfortable, and then the next 2 years or the next year have JT Daniels? But what's your spin there? Do you think it'll be Jamie Newman, the starting quarterback, or will it be JT Daniels?
Yeah, I think Newman will assume the duties. JT Daniels, I think he still has to fight with eligibility. So I don't know if that, unless update me if you have news on that. I don't know if
I don't.
Expected to be eligible. I know he had the leg injury last year at USC, but still he didn't decide to transfer to Georgia till only a couple weeks ago. So
yeah.
I don't know. I'm assuming Newman, and I think the dynamic works out. Like you said, Daniels, he is, nursing a leg injury, but that took the whole season. He injured it week 1, I think against Fresno State in USC's opener last year. So I assume rehab went well and he's good to go. But I do think, kind of going to a different school, let the senior guy, the grad transfer, come in, take the duties, and then Daniels can come in and succeed him after that. So that would be my plan of strategy. But then again, I'm not too sure. But it seems like Georgia likes to have a very full quarterback room, whether it works in their favor or not.
I'm with you there. But moving to Tanner Morgan, that's the guy I had. And then you mentioned a receiver. I'll get to my 2 receivers. And then if you don't have anything, I think we're good. But Tanner Morgan was the guy I had. And this is, I don't know, I guess every summer I have a quarterback that I would label as my guy. A few years ago, it's Ryan Finley, as we all know. And this time it's Tanner Morgan. And maybe
Who was last year? Do you have one from last year?
Last year – he didn't go.
He's batting 500. I can't let you go all strike threes right here.
Well, yeah, the guy last year, he didn't go pro. It was Costello out of Stanford. So
Okay. Speaking of grad transfers, Mississippi State, that's a good one.
Yeah, and that's a good spot for him. I think that's an under the radar when we get into September, October. That'll be something we're talking about. And obviously September, October is very, I don't know, I guess early into the season, obviously. But we'll talk more about Costello. I like his skill set, and I think he's got a big arm. But I don't know, maybe I just like guys that can like run play action because that's what Tanner Morgan can do. Last year when I wrote about him, he was according to Sports Info Solutions, he only had 193 pass attempts on the year. They were, I think, 8-0, 9-0 at the time, and 75 of those attempts were on play action. So one of the most in the country. I just think from being kind of a smaller size quarterback, because he's only listed at 6'2", so probably realistically like 6'1" and 5/8. And this is a guy that I like his skill set. I don't think he's going to necessarily live and die by the deep ball in the NFL. And obviously he's had very good receivers around him, Tyler Johnson, Rashad Bateman, who we'll obviously talk about Bateman as well. But Tanner Morgan, just like you mentioned, he runs that offense to a T the way that they want it to be ran. And I think if you look for a quarterback to be that game manager that can be efficient in the short areas of the field, I think this is your guy. And I mean, again, it's crazy. But if New England does not tank for Trevor Lawrence and they don't get into that Justin Fields conversation, I get it. There's a lot of good quarterbacks, but Tanner Morgan would be a fit there. Maybe, again, I'm not counting Jarrett Stidham out, but if that does not work out, maybe Tanner Morgan's their guy. I don't know. So, and he's bald like Brian Hoyer, so it works out. But the other receiver, or the receivers that I have, as you brought up the Wake Forest receiver, I got Amari Rogers out of Clemson. This is my guy. I know I mentioned him last year, but the door is wide open for him to have a killer year for Clemson, potentially go to the Senior Bowl. He's actually from Tennessee. I was thinking of somebody else from Mobile, Alabama. But either way, he can go to the Senior Bowl. And like, we didn't talk about this last year, but last summer, or like last spring, he tore his ACL in his right knee, and 5 months later, he was back on the football field. I mean, that's unheard of. And he played last year, which is crazy. And like, he played, the second week of the year, didn't do much, played the third week of the year, went off against Syracuse, and he ended up with, I think it was like 35 receptions. He had 3 or 4 touchdowns last year, and then, 400 or 500 yards. But again, he was playing behind Justin Ross and T. Higgins, who went off last year. And then Travis Etienne had a great year. Well, now Justin Ross, he's done for the year. Unfortunately, he had the neck surgery to repair a congenital fusion with 2 fused vertebrae, which was, I think that's something that happened before he even got to Clemson. And now, T. Higgins is gone. So for Amari Rodgers, the door is wide open for a guy that is just freakishly fast, so talented after the catch. I think this is a guy that, by the time we get to next year's draft, if he's healthy, if everything's going according to plan, we'll be talking about him. I think in that top 10 to top 15 wide receiver conversation, I think top 10 is probably what I would stick to there.
Yeah, no, I can't refute that at all. And just something to piggyback off the Rodgers conversation, T. Higgins and Justin Ross both accounted for almost 46% of the receiving yards, and I know there's a couple other guys. So roughly 50% of those reception yards are gone from last year's team. You have to assume that Rodgers will take that step forward because he had 30 catches, a little over 400 yards last year. So he steps into that primary role, and we know primary role at Clemson, especially when you have maybe one of the physically best quarterbacks we've seen in quite some time taking snaps over there. The production's going to be through the roof, and the spotlight's going to be huge. So definitely expect Rodgers to be one of those household names, if he isn't already. But college football is definitely going to get introduced to him firsthand this year.
Yeah, and I've got some clips on Twitter. I've got an article on it in the works on. I'm about halfway done. I'll have it done probably tonight, so I'll be shooting you a text. But I got a couple of plays of him just making catches after, or creating yards after the catch, and it is just. It's absurd of how, and the plays, why they're absurd is because it's literally 5 to 6 months after he tore his ACL. And he was not expected to play last year. Like, I went back and looked at old articles of when he tore his ACL, and everybody was saying he's done for the year. He's done for the year. Every website I came across, he's done for the year. And then, boom, he's playing, the second week of the year, September 7th against Texas A&M. And then week 3, he goes off 4 receptions for 120 yards and 2 scores against Syracuse. And he put that in an interview with Sports Illustrated that I want to be back to play against Syracuse. That's my goal. And he came back a week prior to that. So it's like, it just one of those guys that I like to see the motivation. I like his just overall skill set already. I think he's a good route runner. I think he's got good hands. And his lower body is thick. He fits the bill, I think, for like that slot receiver that's going to make an impact in so many different scenarios. And we talk about guys like Golden Tate when we before the show, we talked Johnny Johnson, how he reminds me a little bit of a Golden Tate. I think Amari Rodgers similar, and as far as they could have similar roles in success at the next level. So I hope that's the case. But that's all the guys that I have over the last few weeks that I've really watched in depth and got some notes on. Obviously, we could talk some quarterbacks, but we could save that, I think, for another show, unless you have anything else to add.
No, I think we covered pretty much everything. I know there's a few guys that I'm looking forward to seeing this season. One of those that tops the list is Walker Little, the offensive tackle out of Stanford last year. I think he tore his ACL. I believe it was week 1. We got the news week 2 that he was going to be out for the rest of the year. He was a guy that I wasn't tremendously high on last year in the preseason. I know he kind of had the buzz as one of those top 20 players, but I think coming back from injuries, we'll see. Hopefully we don't see, a fall like a Trey Adams situation where he's perceived to be one of those top guys and then flips all the way down to being undrafted. So hopefully we see Little kind of, right the ship, kind of have a rejuvenated college football career. And then another offensive lineman too, Creed Humphrey, the center out of Oklahoma, decided to come back, but a guy that we both had in that top 20 conversation and a guy that we really see a lot of potential in. And I think he's been the best Oklahoma offensive lineman for the past couple seasons. And so it'll be interesting to see, how his prospectus goes so far. But I'll get off my offensive line train so we can go and have dinner and break bread and not worry about it, because we could be here all night talking about those guys.
Yeah, no, we really could. But, you guys, of course, like I said, you can find the podcast on Apple Podcasts. You can find it on Spotify, all your podcast platforms. However you go about getting your podcast, you can find us. So search Cover One NFL Draft, download it, rate, review, subscribe, all the goods. And then, of course, get the Cover One app for free. All you have to do is go to your app store, search Cover One, and you will have it right there. Get those push notifications. So whenever we drop fresh content like a podcast episode, it will be right there on your mobile device, however you go about that. So that's all we've got. Find us on Twitter at RussNFLDraft, @_Christian Page. Smash the follow button. Until next time, this is Cover One, the Draft Podcast.